Hi, I'm Raina, and the day I told my husband I was pregnant, he looked at me like I'd infected him and said, "Get rid of it. Don't ruin my career over a mistake." That was the moment everything shattered. But the worst part? 8 months later, while I was screaming through labor, he walked into the delivery room, wearing a white coat, holding my son's life in his hands. You think the betrayal ends there? No, that was only the beginning. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you hearing this? And where are you? Because what happened next still keeps me up at night. Seattle's skyline shimmered through the kitchen window like a painting I could never quite step into. The city always looked most alive after sunset, tiny lights blinking in the drizzle, reflections sliding down the glass. I'd grown to love that glow, that quiet hum beneath the rain. It felt like home. That evening, I set the table just the way he liked it. 2 wine glasses, the expensive plates we'd gotten from his colleagues as a wedding gift, candles that smelled faintly of cedar. The pasta simmered on low. I'd even put on his favorite playlist, soft jazz, steady enough to fill the silence that usually sat between us lately. I'd been rehearsing all afternoon. How to tell him, how to make it sound like joy, not a confession. "Lyle," I practiced under my breath. "We're having a baby." No, too simple. Or maybe, "You're going to be a father." That one made my heart race. When the door opened, I wiped my hands on a towel, forcing a smile. His shoes echoed against the hardwood, precise and sharp. He didn't look up right away, still on a call, still talking about numbers and board meetings, the same way he always did before setting his briefcase down. "Dinner smells good," he said flatly, scrolling through his phone. I waited for him to end the call, to look at me. But when he finally did, his expression carried that faint distance I'd been pretending not to see for months. "Can we talk?" I asked softly. He sat at the table, loosened his tie, nodded like he was bracing himself for bad news. "I went to the doctor today," I began, voice steady but small. "They confirmed it. I'm pregnant." At first, I thought he hadn't heard me. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. Then he blinked once, slow, as if processing an error on a screen. His jaw tightened. "You're... what?" "Pregnant," I repeated, barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was so long I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Then he stood up. "Raina," he said, voice clipped. "You can't be serious." I stared at him, confusion tightening in my chest. "Of course I'm serious. We talked about having kids. Maybe not right away, but..." He cut me off, stepping back as though the words were contagious. "You need to get rid of it. Now." I laughed once, stunned. "You mean the baby?" "Don't call it that," he snapped. "You know what this could do to me, to my career? I'm up for chief of surgery next year. You think the board wants to see me juggling diapers and night shifts?" I felt the air leave my lungs. The candles flickered, one sputtering out. "You're talking about our child like it's a problem to fix." He turned away, running a hand through his hair, that calculated calm of his cracking at the edges. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You knew what this life was when you married me." I stood there, hand unconsciously pressing against my stomach. The kitchen around us blurred. "I thought I did," I whispered. He grabbed his coat, avoided my eyes. "Think about what you're doing. Don't ruin everything we've worked for." Then he was gone. The sound of the door closing echoed through the apartment like a verdict. Outside, rain began to hammer against the windows, harder and harder, until the world beyond turned into silver streaks of motion. I leaned against the counter, staring at the spot where he'd stood, the air still warm from his presence. I couldn't cry. My body wouldn't let me. I just felt hollow, like the walls were too close, like the city outside was watching. Hours passed. The candles burned down to puddles of wax. His plate sat untouched. When I finally sat down, I caught my reflection in the glass. The woman staring back looked unfamiliar, blurred by the raindrops sliding across her face. "How can a heartbeat inside me feel like a crime?" I murmured. My phone buzzed. A message from my sister. "He's just stressed, Rai. Don't make it worse." I typed, then erased my reply 3 times before putting the phone face down. It wasn't stress. It was truth showing its teeth. The city lights shimmered through the rain, fractured and beautiful, like a world I no longer belonged to. And somewhere beneath my palm, a new rhythm pulsed, small, defiant, alive. That night, I realized I was carrying more than a child. I was carrying his secret. I didn't leave. I told myself it was because I needed time to think, to figure out my next step. But 2 weeks later, I was still there, still waking up in a bed that had gone cold, still tiptoeing around my own home like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. The rain hadn't stopped since that night. Seattle had turned gray and quiet, and so had I. Lyle moved into the guest room without a word. He didn't pack anything, just walked in one night and never came back to ours. Every morning, I'd hear the door click shut before the sun rose. I never saw him leave, but the smell of his cologne lingered in the hallway like an afterthought. He stopped looking at me, not in anger, not even with disappointment, just nothing, like I was furniture he didn't know what to do with anymore. The silence between us didn't grow louder, it grew heavier. I began to measure my days in the sounds I didn't hear. No footsteps returning at night, no clinking of his watch hitting the dresser, no voice calling my name. One evening, he came home with 2 colleagues I didn't recognize. One was a woman in a sleek blazer and heels too high for Seattle's sidewalks. The other, a man with an expensive laugh and a politician's smile. They drank scotch in the living room, talking about medical conferences and donor dinners. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to clean. I could hear the woman ask, "So, when do you leave for Geneva? Must be exciting. Such a big opportunity." "Geneva?" Lyle gave a soft chuckle. "Still finalizing the details. Timing's everything." Not once did he glance toward the kitchen. Later that night, while loading the dishwasher, I found his phone left on the counter. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. He was planning a new life, quietly, efficiently, one I wasn't invited to. The next morning, he poured himself coffee, eyes on his tablet. "You should rest more," he said without looking at me. I stared at his back. "I'm fine." He tapped on his screen. "You look fragile." I blinked. It wasn't a comment. It was a dismissal wrapped in polite concern. A way of telling me I was inconvenient, breakable, disposable. That night, I took out a small notebook from the drawer and started writing. Not poetry, not journal entries, just facts, dates, words he said, how often he was home, when he stopped eating with me, when he started using that cold tone, like I was someone from billing. There's a kind of cruelty that doesn't scream, it doesn't hit, it just forgets you exist. At my prenatal appointment 2 days later, the nurse asked, "Will Dad be joining us?" I smiled, then lied. "He's working late." She nodded slowly, almost sympathetically. I could tell she'd heard that line before. She'd probably said it herself once. Back home, I noticed something new on the dining table. A pen, silver, engraved. Lyle's initials were etched along the barrel, elegant and exact. He came in behind me, holding a few forms. "Insurance paperwork for the medical grant," he said, handing them to me. "They need your signature on these." I picked up the pen. It was heavier than it looked. Cold. I glanced at him. "What's this grant for?" "Don't worry about it. It's standard," he replied, already checking his phone. My hand hovered over the line. I hesitated. He looked up just long enough to say, "Keep the pen. You'll need it for the child support forms someday." I didn't respond. Didn't slam the pen down. Didn't cry. I signed the papers and left the pen exactly where he'd set it. That night, I didn't write in the notebook. I stared at the ceiling instead, listening to the wind slap against the windows. The apartment used to be filled with music, with laughter, ours or someone else's. Now it was filled with pauses, long, deep pauses, like the walls were trying not to make a sound, like the apartment wasn't silent anymore. It was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. And then, it did. 8 months passed, and I had become a different woman. Not stronger, not yet, just quieter. The kind of quiet that comes after a long storm, when you're not sure if it's really over or if it's only gathering strength again. I'd left the apartment months ago, packed what I could fit in 2 suitcases, and rented a small space above a florist shop downtown. The air always smelled of roses and damp soil. It was simple: 1 bedroom, 1 window, 1 life. The silence followed me, but it wasn't cruel anymore. It was mine. I spent my mornings reading baby books from the library, evenings sketching small dreams in a journal, names, plans, nothing grand. I didn't talk about Lyle. People in the building thought I was a widow, and I didn't correct them. It was easier that way. But peace is fragile. It never asks permission before it leaves. That night, a storm rolled in. I was folding baby clothes, tiny socks that looked too small to belong to anything real, when the first pain hit. Sharp, sudden, wrong. I froze, clutching the table. The second wave came faster, stealing my breath. My phone slipped from my hand and landed face down on the floor. "Not yet," I whispered, pressing my palm against my stomach. "Please, not yet." By the time the paramedics arrived, the contractions were close enough to steal the spaces between words. I remember the rain hammering the ambulance roof, the flashing lights painting everything blue. When we reached the hospital, the air smelled like antiseptic and metal, the kind of clean that feels too sharp to breathe in. They wheeled me through the corridors, voices blurring into background noise. "She's 34 weeks, pressure's rising, get an attending now." The fluorescent lights stung my eyes. The pain came and went like tides, and I clung to the rails, trying to stay anchored in the chaos. A nurse leaned close. "You're doing great, sweetheart. Just focus on breathing." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I still knew how. Then the door opened. The sound of shoes on the tile. Calm, controlled, familiar. And then that voice. Steady, clinical, unmistakable. "Dr. Carrington will be leading the procedure." The room tilted. My fingers went cold. No, it couldn't be. But when I looked up, there he was, Lyle, standing beneath the harsh white light, wearing scrubs, gloves, that same unreadable calm. The air left my lungs. "You shouldn't be here." He didn't flinch. "Neither should you," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the monitor. "But here we are." The nurse glanced between us, her brow furrowing. "Doctor, is everything—" "Let's begin," he cut her off, voice firm. "Time is critical." My heartbeat drowned out everything. The monitors, the storm outside, even my own thoughts. He moved around me like I was a task, checked vitals, gave instructions. Never met my eyes. Each touch felt mechanical, like he was repairing something broken, but not me. Never me. "Focus on breathing, Mrs. Carrington," he said. "Don't call me that," I gasped, the pain splitting through me. The nurse hesitated, sensing the tension, but professionalism bound her in silence. Every contraction blurred into the next. The ceiling lights pulsed above me like a heartbeat I couldn't control. Outside, thunder cracked against the glass windows. Rain streaked down in frantic lines, echoing the rhythm of my own panic. The storm had found its way inside. Through the haze, I caught glimpses of Lyle's face, calm, detached, almost serene. He spoke in short commands, his voice the same one that used to whisper, "I love you," in the dark. I wanted to scream, to curse him, to ask him how he could stand there, bringing this child into the world after wishing it gone. But my body was at war with itself, and words were too fragile to survive the pain. Then, through the blinding agony, a sound cut through the air. A cry, small, fierce, alive. The world went still. The storm paused, just for a moment. Lyle froze too. For the first time, I saw something shift in his face. Not remorse, something smaller. Regret, maybe, or recognition. He turned toward the nurse. "Healthy baby boy," he said, voice steady but softer. I wanted to look at him, to see if he meant it. But he was already walking away. I held my son for the first time as thunder rolled over the city. The lights flickered, and the rain streaked across the window again, steady, endless, forgiving. I traced the tiny fingers curled around mine and whispered, "You made it." He stirred, eyes closed, breathing against my skin. And for the first time in months, I felt something that almost resembled peace. Not because Lyle was gone, but because I was still here. He delivered my child into this world, and in that moment, I buried the love that once built mine. I stayed in that hospital room longer than I needed to, not because I was in pain, at least not the kind they could treat, but because going home felt like stepping off a ledge I wasn't sure I could land from. 3 days later, the discharge nurse wheeled me out through the lobby with my son bundled against my chest. The sky outside was gray, a flat kind of gray that didn't promise rain, just the absence of light. Mrs. Dorsey was waiting by the curb, standing beside her old Buick. She had a scarf wrapped around her head and a basket in her hand. "There you are," she said softly, eyes scanning my face. "You look like you walked through fire." "I think I did," I murmured. She didn't ask questions, just helped me into the passenger seat, then gently took the baby carrier like it was made of glass. Back at the apartment, she helped me inside and set the basket on the counter. "Chicken and barley soup. Old recipe. He needs you strong." I thanked her and promised I'd try to eat later. She nodded, lingered a moment, then let herself out. Her kindness filled the space in a way silence never could. I lowered myself onto the couch and exhaled slowly, watching my son sleep in his carrier. His tiny mouth moved like he was dreaming something too big for his body. I sat there for a long time, not thinking, just listening, to the ticking of the old wall clock, the wind brushing the glass, and the soft breath of a life that depended entirely on me. When I finally looked toward the door, I saw it. A white envelope. It had no stamp, no address, just my name, written in Lyle's handwriting. My fingers hesitated before reaching for it. I already knew it wasn't going to hold anything I wanted. Inside, legal documents, custody terms, insurance declarations. A short note clipped to the top. "I trust you'll make the right decision for the child. Please sign where marked, L.C." That was it. No name, no apology, no mention of our son. Just paperwork. Tucked between the pages was a folded newspaper clipping. I opened it with numb hands. There he was, Lyle, in a suit, grinning beside a visibly pregnant patient. The headline read, "Dr. Carrington receives humanitarian award, champion of women's health." I didn't feel tears, just heat, the kind that settles beneath your skin and waits for the right moment to burn. I laid the envelope flat on the coffee table and placed the silver pen on top, the one he left behind months ago, the same one he said I'd need for child support forms someday. This time, I picked it up and wrote, carefully and clearly, across the front of the envelope, "You signed away more than my name." I didn't scream. didn't tear the papers. I just folded everything neatly and tucked them back in the envelope like old receipts. That night, after I fed the baby and rocked him to sleep, I turned on the TV without thinking. There he was again. On a stage, accepting another plaque, smiling, talking about sacrifice and the strength of families. I watched in silence, studied his eyes. He wasn't lying. He just forgot which side of the truth he stood on. Outside, the rain returned, not angry this time, just quiet, almost respectful. It tapped against the window like it was asking permission to be let in. I sat there for hours, not angry, not crying, just awake. By morning, I started pulling together everything I had: emails, voice messages, copies of forms, dated journals. Not because I wanted revenge. That would have made him the center of my story again. No, I needed to know I hadn't imagined it, that it happened, that I mattered. This wasn't about destroying his reputation. It was about protecting my reality, about leaving a trail I could follow back to myself if I ever got lost again. He wanted silence, so I gave it to him, the kind that listens, remembers, and never forgets. And after that letter, something inside me clicked. Not like a switch, more like a door gently closing. I didn't slam it, didn't lock it. I just let it rest shut. The days after became strangely clear. Noah would giggle at the tiniest things: a spoon tapping the edge of his bowl, the rustle of my hair brushing his cheek. His laughter became the soundtrack of my mornings, softening the sharpness of everything else. But every time I passed the bus stop down on Pine, I saw his face, Lyle's, smiling from a hospital billboard. Seattle's Heart of Hope. Hope. The word sat wrong in my throat. I pushed Noah's stroller past it one afternoon, keeping my gaze forward. But something flared behind my ribs. It wasn't rage, not quite, more like precision. I was back to freelancing again. Medical illustrations, textbook figures, sometimes detailed animations for health campaigns. I worked during Noah's naps, in the still hours of early morning or late night, when my mind was quiet enough to draw. Then came the email. Subject line: Seattle Heart Gala. Official invitation to contributing artists. I scanned it twice. Lyle's name, naturally, was bolded in gold, being honored for leadership and innovative contributions to maternal care. Families welcome, but mine wasn't listed. Not even a thank you. Instead, at the bottom of the invitation, was an image. My fetal development chart, the one I'd illustrated 3 months into pregnancy, back when I still believed in his voice beside mine. Only now, it was credited to someone named Vanessa Crowley. I whispered aloud, "They used my creation to celebrate the man who erased me." Noah stirred from his nap. I kissed his forehead and tucked the blanket tighter around him. Then I opened my laptop. I didn't plan to expose him. That wasn't the goal. I was done being erased. I began organizing files. My original drafts, sketches, time-stamped PSDs, email threads with the hospital's PR contact, every detail showing my hand in the work. I labeled the folder Truth. No caps, no dramatics, just clean, dated files. That weekend, I accepted the job offer buried in the email: freelance coverage of the event itself, illustrations for the gala program. It paid little, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to crash the event. I was going to document it. Quietly. The night of the gala, I dressed in black, hair tied back, clipboard in hand. I slipped through the service entrance like any other vendor. My badge said, Illustrator, Event Media. No one looked twice. I moved along the walls, watching, sketching, noting faces. Noah was with Mrs. Dorsey for the evening. She'd handed me a tiny pouch of lavender for my coat pocket. "For nerves," she said, pressing it into my hand. "You don't have to fight. Just see." The ballroom was gold and blue, soft music echoing off glass walls. Lyle stood near the stage, surrounded by colleagues, donors, and a photographer with a white umbrella flash that kept blinking like lightning. He looked exactly the same. The only thing different was my silence. When he took the stage, I stepped closer, pen in hand, the same silver one he once left behind. It felt lighter now. He smiled to the crowd. I owe everything to the team that stood beside me, and to the rising generation, especially those like Vanessa, he said, gesturing toward a young woman with red-rimmed glasses. The applause was warm. People nodded, clinked glasses. The camera clicked. I jotted notes, not for publication, for memory. Lyle spoke about family, resilience, the importance of care. He paused for effect, scanned the room. His gaze slid over me and didn't stop. Of course it didn't. I was nobody in that moment, just the quiet woman with the clipboard. But I smiled anyway, because I knew this image wouldn't last forever. He thought I was gone, but he'd forgotten. I've always been the one who draws the details. That night after the gala, I barely slept. Not from restlessness, but clarity. It's strange how peace doesn't always come with softness. Sometimes it feels like steel settling into place. Morning came with sun that felt too bright for the weight I carried. Noah was already babbling in his crib, reaching out toward the window like he was greeting the day. I held him longer than usual, then made coffee I barely drank. Around 9 a.m., an email came through from a journalist I'd exchanged notes with a few weeks prior. She had asked for confirmation that I was the original illustrator of the fetal development series used in the gala program. I sent her all the files, time-stamped, watermarked, backed up. Her message was short. "You'll be credited. Thank you for your time, Ms. Carrington." I don't know why, but my eyes stung reading that line. Maybe it was the Ms., a reminder that even my name now stood apart from him. Later that afternoon, while rocking Noah to sleep, I opened the digital version of the article on my phone. I scrolled slowly, passing the familiar photo of Lyle standing beside the hospital's CEO, hand on some donor's shoulder, polished smile in full bloom. There it was, the chart. My chart. Except this time, beneath the caption, the credit read, "Illustration by Vanessa Moore." My breath stalled. It was subtle, quiet, but sharp. Like that moment in the kitchen months ago when Lyle called my pregnancy a mistake. Back then, it was my body. Now, it was my name. I emailed the journalist immediately. Her reply came within the hour. "Apologies for the confusion. We received a correction request from Dr. Carrington's office, stating that the original file was misattributed. We replaced it as a professional courtesy." Professional courtesy. I stared at those two words for a long time, my jaw locked tight. It wasn't a mistake. It was sabotage. By evening, I had packed Noah's diaper bag and secured him in the car seat. The air was warm with the beginnings of summer, and traffic moved in slow, pulsing waves down toward the hospital district. I didn't plan to confront him. I wasn't going there to make noise. I just needed to feel the floor beneath my feet, to look the machine in the eye and remind myself I still existed beyond the edges of someone else's narrative. The parking lot was fuller than I remembered, probably from visiting families or press still hanging around after the gala. I parked on the far end, took the elevator to the main lobby, and stepped inside with Noah on my hip. The receptionist at the front desk looked up and blinked in recognition. Her smile was stiff, as if unsure whether to offer kindness or pretend she didn't know me. "I'm here to update my information," I said. She nodded slowly, typing something into the system. "I still have your ID on file," she said, turning the screen toward me. It was an old photo from when I first started illustrating educational material for the Heart Center's maternity wing. My hair was shorter then, my smile wider. A different life? I signed the digital form without hesitation, using the silver pen I'd carried for months, the same one Lyle once tossed on the table when he said I'd need it for child support forms. Before handing it back, I paused. Under the signature box, I wrote one more line. Former illustrator. Current witness. The receptionist read it, eyebrows furrowing slightly. Should I include this? No, I said gently. He'll understand. I left without another word. Back home, I fed Noah and laid him down for a nap. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that listens, not just exists. I opened my laptop and began sorting files again. Not for a lawsuit, not for a headline, just for the record. Every draft I'd ever sent, every note between me and the hospital's PR office, every sketchbook scan. I labeled the folder Living Proof. It felt grounding, like placing stones along a path only I knew the end of. Around 8:20 that night, a message slid into my inbox. No sender, no subject line, just a single sentence and one attached image. You're not the first, but you might be the last. The photo showed Lyle standing beside another woman in a hospital conference room. Her posture was too familiar, angled slightly away, smile tight, eyes watching the floor like she was trying to disappear. Her name wasn't in the caption, but I didn't need a caption to know the feeling in her shoulders. I stared at the photo, hands still on the keyboard, and I thought, he's not just rewriting my story, he's perfecting the erasure, over and over again. For a moment, I didn't feel angry. I felt steady, because now I knew. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't alone. And the silence I'd been cultivating, it wasn't passive. It was collecting, not to destroy, but to remember. Not to attack, but to prepare. I closed the laptop slowly, stood by the window, and looked out over the city as dusk turned its corners pink and blue. A soft breeze moved the sheer curtain beside me. For the first time in months, I felt something close to power. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that remembers. The morning after the anonymous message, I opened the Living Proof folder again. But this time, I renamed it Evidence. That word meant something different now. It wasn't just about remembering anymore. It was about showing. About stitching together what had been unpicked, erased, and swept aside. I waited until Noah went down for his nap, then sat at the tiny table by the window. My laptop hummed to life, and the fan in the corner did its best to stir the warm midsummer air. I pulled out the silver pen and scribbled notes beside me as I opened each file. First, the original drafts of the fetal chart, time-stamped and digitally signed. My signature, clear as day. Next, emails between me and the hospital PR team. They thanked me, confirmed receipt, even commented on how the clean anatomical accuracy gave the materials more credibility. Then came the twist. 3 weeks later, a forwarded message chain buried in my inbox. Lyle's name. His words. This will be finalized under Vanessa Moore's department. There was no correction, no explanation, just a smooth, silent handoff. I kept going. Invoices, payment logs. Most went through normally until I noticed 2 payments that never hit my account. Same date, same invoice ID, but the payee had changed. Vanessa Moore. I stared at the screen for a full minute, letting the weight of it settle in. This wasn't just negligence, it was precision theft, surgical in its execution. And it wasn't just me. I started pulling archived files from the hospital's digital repository, ones I still had access to through an old login that somehow hadn't been revoked. In those files, I found more patterns, notes signed by women I didn't know, charts with different styles. Then suddenly, different names, familiar ones, familiar in how they vanished. It took hours, but eventually one caught my attention. Dr. Elise Navarro. She had published a groundbreaking perinatal study a few years ago, and then nothing. Her name disappeared from publications, her project reassigned due to restructuring. It smelled the same. I searched for her through alumni records and medical research groups, finally finding an outdated email address. I sent a short message, honest, careful. I think you and I have a shared history. I'm not looking to ruin anyone, just looking for the truth. She replied the next morning. There's a diner on Westlake, near the pier, tomorrow, noon. I'll sit by the window. It was a warm, clear day, the kind where sunlight bounces off car hoods and makes you squint even with sunglasses on. I left Noah with Mrs. Dorsey downstairs, packed his bag with extra bottles and teething rings, and promised I wouldn't be long. The diner smelled of grilled onions and old coffee. I spotted her right away. Thin frame, pressed blouse, eyes that flicked toward the door every time it opened. She looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from holding something in for too long. "You're Raina?" she asked, as I slid into the seat across from her. I nodded. She glanced around again, then leaned in. I don't know how to say it, but yes, he did it to me too. He took credit, redirected funding, told the board I was unstable. Her mouth twisted on that last word. I lost my license for almost a year, she said. They said I was having emotional episodes, all because I asked why my work was being removed from the study credits. I didn't react, I just listened. And the worst part, she whispered, is I started to believe them, that maybe I was too emotional, too difficult. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. You weren't unstable. You were inconvenient. We sat in silence for a moment, letting that settle. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive, slid it across the table like something sacred. Everything I couldn't prove back then, emails, drafts, his edits, maybe you can. I took it, tucked it gently into my pocket. Thank you, I said. As we stood to leave, the sky outside had darkened, a summer storm rolling in, the kind that comes fast and leaves puddles glowing under streetlights. I watched Elise walk away without turning back, her silhouette folding into the crowd. Back home, I waited until Noah was asleep, and then opened the files. Her records were meticulous. Meeting minutes, drafts with metadata, screenshots. Lyle's fingerprints were all over them, redacting names, editing credits, reassigning ownership with surgical quietness. But the trail was there. I opened a blank affidavit template, no initials this time, no pseudonyms. Raina Carrington. Date July 12th. Witness statement, on the record. I reached for the silver pen and signed. Slow, deliberate. I printed everything, sealed the folder. No note, no sender name. Just a plain envelope, thick with truth. At sunrise, I walked it to the mailbox at the corner of my street, slid it in. No hesitation. As I turned back toward my apartment, the air smelled like wet concrete and magnolia. My feet didn't feel heavy. My chest didn't feel tight. It wasn't over, not even close. But for the first time, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was preparing for exposure. The truth was finally out there, but so was I. No more hiding behind files and whispers. I had stepped into the light, and I could feel it burning on my skin, like the moment before a storm cracks open the sky. The morning air was unusually still. I was spoon-feeding Noah mashed bananas at the kitchen counter when a sharp knock broke through the quiet. I opened the door slowly, half expecting a neighbor or a package. Instead, it was a man in a gray suit, pressed but weary, holding a manila envelope with my name scrawled across the front. "Ms. Carrington?" he asked, with that artificial courtesy lawyers reserve for people they intend to silence. I nodded. He handed me the envelope. "From Dr. Lyle Carrington's legal team. Consider this a preliminary communication." I didn't respond. just closed the door slowly, pressing my back against it once he was gone. I opened it carefully. Inside were 6 pages of legal threats, defamation, breach of confidentiality, and a thinly veiled accusation of psychological instability. Not a lawsuit, just enough to rattle the cage. He wanted me to feel small, fragile, unhinged. But all it did was confirm one thing. I'd hit the nerve he never thought anyone would touch. I called a legal advocacy clinic that same afternoon. They assigned me a woman named Deanna, retired, sharp, and dry as bone. After skimming the document, she looked up from her glasses and said, "This is noise, designed to scare. You've got documentation?" "Every line," I said. "Good. Truth is your shield, Raina. Keep it clean, keep it chronological, and don't flinch." 1 week later, the hospital called a press conference. I didn't need to be there in person. I already knew how he'd look: calm, elegant, confident, every movement rehearsed, every word trimmed and polished. Noah napped beside me while I streamed the event from my laptop. I sat cross-legged on the couch, blanket wrapped around my shoulders, even though the apartment was warm. Lyle stepped behind the podium under those blazing stage lights. Behind him, the hospital logo stood tall, unchallenged, untouchable. "Recent rumors have circulated," he began, "regarding alleged misconduct in the administrative chain of our department. Let me be clear. These are fabrications, misinformation. My work and this institution stand firmly rooted in ethical excellence." He smiled, smooth, scripted. I nearly closed the laptop until the voice cut through the room. "Dr. Carrington," a journalist called out, "can you confirm these are your emails?" The camera jolted slightly as the audience turned. On the screen behind Lyle, a set of emails appeared, one after another, digital letterheads. His words, approving the reassignments, confirming payments, redirecting credit. At the bottom of the final email, in my handwriting, "Every heart deserves truth, including mine." He froze. The smile flickered. The corners of his mouth twitched downward. His throat moved, but nothing came out. The room erupted into low murmurs. Another reporter stood up. A third raised a phone to capture the screen. He tried to speak, twice, but his voice cracked. For the first time, he wasn't the one in control. I watched it all from my couch. My hand rested lightly on Noah's back as he stirred. He was still dreaming, unaware that his mother had just cracked the foundation of a man who once believed she was disposable. "This isn't revenge," I whispered. "It's correction." My phone buzzed a few moments later. A message from Elise. They suspended him, pending full investigation. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then exhaled. Slow, long, steady. Outside, the rain started to fall. Soft, rhythmic. Not the wild kind that tears through trees, but the gentle drizzle that seeps into the earth and makes things grow again. Later that night, I sat at my dining table with a single sheet of paper in front of me. Noah's birth certificate. It had been sitting unsigned for weeks. Part of me had delayed out of hesitation, out of grief, out of some twisted sense of unfinished history. But now, it was time. I picked up the silver pen. My fingers didn't shake this time. In the line that asked for Mother's name, I wrote clearly, Raina Elise Carrington. No hesitation, no initials, no shame. When I set the pen down, I stared at the name for a moment, simple, unadorned, and let it settle. This was my truth. This was my signature, no longer written in fear. The next morning, I mailed the document myself, then walked to the waterfront with Noah in his stroller, letting the sea breeze comb through my hair. I didn't need applause. I didn't want headlines. I wanted integrity. Wholeness. The ability to say, I spoke when it counted. He built his empire on silence, and I learned how to make silence speak. It's strange how quiet victory feels. Not loud, not glorious, just settled, like the way the ocean breathes when no one's listening. Weeks passed since the press conference, and the world kept spinning. Slower, softer, but still spinning. Lyle resigned. No public disgrace, just a dry, formal statement citing personal reasons. I didn't expect fireworks, only the kind of hush that comes when someone finally runs out of excuses. The hospital issued a letter, not to me directly, but to every contributor whose work had been miscredited. A flat, bureaucratic apology. But my name was printed. This time, spelled correctly. A full paragraph acknowledging the fetal development chart as my creation. No small font, no parentheses, just mine. My inbox flooded with responses, some kind, some cruel, some from former colleagues who had no idea and always wondered why I left. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, but one message made me pause. A simple line from Elise. You reminded us that truth still has a pulse. Elise. I sat with it for a while, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I thought about answering, then just closed the laptop and smiled. Some things don't need replies. That same morning, I opened the windows to let the salt air in. The new studio wasn't large, but it was mine. Real hardwood floors, exposed beams, enough natural light to make the shadows gentle. Noah was crawling near the easel, smacking his palms against the wood like he was testing the rhythm of the world. Each tap echoed in the room, like a heartbeat, steady, present, alive. I was working on a new piece, my first since giving birth. Layers of ochre and slate, hints of red barely peeking through. No outlines yet, just movement, motion without direction. This, I thought, is what survival sounds like. There was no pressure behind the brush, no deadline. No eyes watching over my shoulder, just the paint, the canvas, and a little boy drumming the floor with his joy. Later, as I sorted through an old filing box, I found the silver pen, tucked under paperwork I hadn't touched since leaving the hospital. Its barrel was colder than I remembered. The ink had dried up, but the engraving still caught the light, sharp, stubborn. I held it in my palm for a long time. Once it was a tool of submission, then defiance. Now, it was just history. I placed it in a small glass jar on my bookshelf, next to the black and white ultrasound photo of Noah at 20 weeks. I didn't need to carry it anymore. Not as a weapon, not as armor. Just a reminder. Some things lose their power the moment you stop needing them. The rain returned that evening. Light, constant. It tapped the windows like a song I used to know. There was a time that sound broke me. Now, it was lullaby. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the puddles collect on the street below. Every drop seemed softer than the last. Then the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved, and I was mid-sip. But curiosity nudged me. It was the journalist, the same one who asked the hard question during the press conference. "We're putting together a feature," he said. "Women in medicine who spoke out, who rebuilt after being erased. Would you be open to sharing your story?" I looked at the canvas, still unfinished, but no longer blank. "I already did," I said. "Just not the way you think." He paused, maybe confused. I wasn't. The painting in front of me, layered with soft grays and crimson threads, pulsed like breath. I had titled it The Pulse. At the bottom, I'd signed my name in bold, Raina Delmore. Not Carrington, not anonymous, not silent, the version of me who stayed quiet. She was still part of the story, but she didn't hold the pen anymore. Outside, the rain thickened slightly, brushing the window like an old friend. I closed my eyes and listened, not for what was missing, but for what had always been there, waiting to be heard. Peace isn't the absence of pain, it's learning how to make it sing.